After seeing our families in Byron Bay, our first stop on the way back to Melbourne was a quaint little Scottish town called Maclean in New South Wales. This little town sits right on the river, and continuing with the town's Scottish theme, even the telegraph poles have tartan on them. We ordered a coffee and sat down and soaked up the sun for a little bit before we had to hop back in the car and keep driving. After a couple of hours of driving, we passed the Big Banana at Coffs Harbour and then continued driving into the mountains to a little town called Bellingen. The township of Bellingen was lovely, and there were lots of old, beautiful buildings. After a leisurely walk down the street, we decided to have some lunch, so we stopped at a little Lebanese place and got a pita pocket and a falafel plate, which was so good. So after a lovely time in Bellingen, we were back on the road again. We decided to drive through Waterfall Way, which is the scenic route and winds through the mountains past various waterfalls. The landscape changed so much from rainforest to flat countryside that we had no idea that we would soon run into a beautiful waterfall. After driving for a couple more hours, we finally reached Armidale, which was our first stopover. It was about -3 degrees in Armidale, so it was freezing, so I'd already put on my slippers and I made James and I a cup of tea for the evening. After our cup of tea, we headed off for dinner to a little Thai restaurant. With full bellies, we headed home, and I got ready for bed by taking off my makeup, having a nice hot shower, and getting into some warm jammies for the cold night. on the road again after leaving Armidale to our next stop, Uralla. Uralla was such a sweet little town that James and I loved it so much that we decided next time we come back through this way, we want to stop here instead of Armidale. This was so much nicer. I forgot to mention, we were doing this whole trip not using our phones or satellite navigation, it was all using a map book. We decided to do it old school. So for the second day of travel, we left Armidale, went through Uralla, Tamworth, Muswellbrook, and finally stopping at my Nan and Pop's place in Cessnock. I know this is totally random, but we saw this car in front of us that was covered in mud. They must have come from the outback somewhere, doing some cross-country driving. And since we didn't want to wait around too long for lunch, we had a quick stop at McDonald's and picked up some food. As the sun was setting, we finally arrived in Cessnock to go see Nanny and Poppy. And on the side of the road, guess what we saw? We had a lovely evening the night before catching up with Nan and Pop since we hadn't seen them in so long, so we didn't film much, but this is what it looked like in the morning. Absolutely beautiful with frost all over the grass. And here I am in Nanny's cute little bathroom with my hair all done up, ready for our next day of driving. At the beginning of each day, James liked to clean the windscreen and completely fill the car up with fuel for our long day of driving. And after filling up fuel, we got a lovely hot cup of coffee. And each day I so thoroughly enjoyed opening the map and looking through where we were going, and it really put into perspective where we were in Australia, and I felt like I learnt a lot more about where we were travelling in comparison to just looking at a phone for navigation. On the third day, we left Cessnock, went through Mudgee, Bathurst, and then stopped in Goulburn for the night. It was already dark by the time we arrived in Goulburn, and we checked in at the Goulburn Heritage Motor Inn. And I made sure to ring Nanny and Poppy to let them know that we'd arrived safely. It's about 0 degrees this morning and it's
absolutely freezing out. There's frost everywhere and it's so foggy, so you can't see very far in front of you on the road, but it's very exciting. And we're not warm enough, we're very cold. I've got my leather jacket on and my woolen jumper underneath, and James is just freezing. He doesn't have enough clothes, he doesn't have enough jackets, but we'll make it. We'll turn the heat up in the car and keep driving.
Is it warm?
Very warm.
So we left Goulburn, and it was only actually 2 hours before we reached our next place in Holbrook. But we wanted to make a day of it, so we stopped at lots of different places. We stopped at a little rest stop in Bookham on the side of the road for lunch, and then moved on to Gundagai in the afternoon. Five miles from Gundagai, there is an iconic Australian monument, which is the dog on the tucker box. The statue was inspired by a bullock driver's poem, Bullocky Bill, in the 1800s, which celebrated the life of his loyal dog that guarded the man's tucker box. Although there are some poems that suggest he didn't guard the tucker box and instead did his business in it. After seeing the beautiful rolling hills of Gundagai, we moved on to another town not far away called Tumut. We got out of the car, had a bit of a stretch and breathed in the lovely crisp air. We hopped back in the car and drove another 13 or so kilometres to the next town called Armidale, which was a gold mining town back in the day. To get to the gold mining ruins, we drove along a long dirt road and went down to explore. The sun was setting fast, so we had to make a run for it to get to Holbrook before the sun set. We arrived in Holbrook at the Jolly Swagman Motor Inn, which had a very classic motel look. And as there was a Chinese restaurant attached to the motel, we were lucky enough to have a delicious Chinese omelette for dinner. So yummy. After the delicious dinner, I had a shower, did my skincare, and got ready for bed. It was our fifth and final day on the road, and it was much warmer than Goulburn and Armidale. It was probably around 3 degrees Celsius when we woke up.
in Holbrook this morning. We just left the Jolly Swagman Motor Inn and we're going to see what this submarine in Holbrook is all about. Like, why is there a submarine here? We're in the middle of nowhere, there's no water. So we're gonna find out what's going on with that. Alright, let's go check it out.
The Holbrookshire Council dedicated Otway as a tribute to all submariners past, present and future. The submarine was unveiled by Mrs. Gundula Holbrook. She was the widow of Commander N.D. Holbrook, after whom the town was named. So for our last and final day on the road, we were heading back to Melbourne. We left Holbrook and pretty much made a beeline straight for Melbourne. Part of New South Wales had started coming up with COVID cases, so once we crossed the border, we couldn't get out of the car and we had to make it straight back home, get our COVID test, and then isolate until we got a negative result. And we finally made it home, all safe and COVID-free, and celebrated with a cup of tea in the backyard.